Hello and welcome back to Take Two. We're your hosts. I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Stacy.
And we're licensed therapists. Forgot to mention that the last episode.
Always? Still licensed?
Still licensed. And today we're talking all about anxiety. And we just want to do kind of an overview. Hopefully, if you guys are interested, we can go into deeper dives in the future. But today we're just going to talk about, healthy anxiety, helpful anxiety versus unhelpful anxiety, and also share with you guys some different types of anxiety disorders that are out there. I think people just hear the word anxiety. They don't necessarily know what it means or how to specify that
a lot of
there
different
are
ways
different,
to be anxious.
and that there are different diagnoses.
And that
anxiety.
you can treat them differently. So it is somewhat important to know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay,
before we get started, I wanted to do a check-in, and I think that this dovetails nicely because we had talked about your TED Talk.
Yes.
And you being anxious and, not feeling as confident, so you did the talk. I was there, so I know, but why don't you share with the people?
How I felt?
Yeah, give us your take.
Oh my gosh, okay. I think it was a great experience, obviously, but as you saw, they are very particular.
Very rigid.
Which I think increased my anxiety.
Did it?
Yes, because it was so great because I think it taught me how to write a lot better because, my writing can be all over the place. Stacy's the writer. I'm not.
No, it was good. It was good.
But I think even the things they'd be like change and to and like just the little words. I'm like, how am I going to remember all of this? I'm a big off the cuff, not a big planner.
I know.
So for me, it was new. And I think it increased my anxiety, but I will say so. I started to get really anxious. And
I got really anxious walking in there.
I haven't felt that anxious probably since middle school, honestly.
I believe you.
Or maybe college.
We were all like, we are so anxious and we are not doing this talk.
But I don't know why. I don't know.
It's a stage.
I think TED just brings the word.
I feel like you've probably spoken to bigger crowds, but it's almost like
but it was never
the
anxiety.
Circumstance and you're right.
Every time I told someone, oh, I'm doing a TED, they're like, oh, you're doing a talk. So then it just like, every time someone reacted like that, it would increase the anxiety.
I can see that. And then the formalness around it, I think.
Do you see?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very cool, though. There was like a poster.
It was so cool.
I was like taking pictures with your poster, which was weird.
My dad's like, can you bring that poster home with you? I'm like, what are you going to do? Put that in the living room? That's so weird.
You should have brought it home. No? That would have been really funny.
We don't need that. But no, exactly. To the point, though, is that they're even like the higher up TED himself, not a person, but they are particular about the letters, like how far apart they are, the color of red that the rug is.
It's a very uniform, standardized. When I walked in with a bottle of water, because there was a sign that said no food or water, the woman stopped me and was like, you can't drink that. And it's like, when do you ever get stopped with a bottle of water?
And my dad's over there chomping on an apple.
Eating his apple.
Before. We'll have to post that.
He got away with it. Me with my water.
It must have been in his pocket.
I was scared to drink. I was like, I'm not getting called out of here. I was like, I feel like there's going to be like a hook removing me. Like, we've seen you. No. But okay, so nervous.
Okay, but so I was very nervous. Couldn't sleep, obviously. So anxious. And then I was driving there and I was like practicing in the car and my husband was driving me, Danny. And like Danny he's very helpful to a point, but then he reaches a point where he hasn't seen me that anxious. And so then he just felt really anxious, obviously.
That's like if you get anxious before like something...
Then it makes me
more anxious. Like,
I'm never allowed to be anxious, apparently.
Never. She's the rock. She used to be the rock for everybody.
So he dropped me off and he's like, okay, I'm going to go because obviously I had to be there a lot earlier than him. Yeah. And I started crying.
You did?
Yeah. And he was like, oh, do you want to go for a walk? Like, look at it. How you're married to a therapist. I'm like, yeah. So we're walking. I'm like, I can't do this. I think we should just leave. And he's like, Lindsay, you're not leaving. I'm like, I have free will. I can leave. And he's like, okay, you could.
Right.
But is that the best choice right now? So I ended up staying, obviously. And I just was so anxious. I was nervous I was going to have a panic attack. So I set myself up.
Same.
I had my note cards. I gave it to my coach. She had them in case I needed them, but I really wanted to try without them. I think the sound guy behind the curtain was like, are you okay? Really? I was pacing back and forth. He's like,
Did you feel like your heart was literally beating out of your body?
He was like, I was probably drenched. Who knows? Like, I don't even want to know. And he was like, I really like your outfit. I'm like, thanks. Just like head down, like get this over with.
Stop talking to me.
Yeah, I'm like, I need to focus.
I need to disappear.
But then as you know, I went out there and I was really anxious at first and I was shaking. And I felt like then I was like, people can see that I'm shaking. And then I'm like, what if I forget? And I'm like, just focus on what I tell my cheerleaders, and I'm like, I always tell them, oh my gosh, you got this. And now I'm like, how it's so easy when it's you. I'm like, focus on what you're talking about in this moment. Trust your brain. I'm like, I have a therapist brain. I remember everything. Like, trust your brain. But then when the first time people started laughing and I hadn't practiced leaving space for people laughing, so then I was like, and then I forgot what I was saying.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, because in my brain I was like just autopilot. Right. And then the autopilot got disrupted because everybody was laughing, which is good.
I was going to say, like, did that make you feel better when people laughed?
No, I was still panicking. I think what made me feel better was once we got to my TikTok portion, I knew I was near the end. And then you could see me relax. Danny's like, once you got comfortable, I'm like, it's not that I got comfortable. I was like, the end is near.
Yeah. It's almost over.
But it was really nice they had my coach back there. So when I forgot I literally forgot blank what I was saying. And I was like, Heather? And then she let me know what the next line was.
And I said it was really natural because you were talking about your accomplishments.
Yeah.
And then you just looked at it and you go, what else did I do?
I know. I was like trying to talk to you. I was like, Stacy, help me.
But it was good because I was like, even in, making the mistake, like we said, you made it.
It was fine.
It was cute.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, but it was just kind of like you were like, wait, no, what else
and
did
I think Heather said it too, my coach. She was like, once that happens, though, then the crowd's on your side. Like, they want, like, it was
oh my gosh,
people who...
I just heard about this. I think it was Mel Robbins' podcast. And we know what it is, but it's called the pratfall effect, where people align with you more and enjoy you more, like, if they see you as a human. Like, making a mistake. And I thought of, like, Jennifer Lawrence, how people would always be like, oh, God, is she going to fall again?
Yeah,
because I think it made her, like, that so relatable. Mm-hmm. So that is so true.
I know. So I think, like, and even you saying you walk in and you feel anxious for me.
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
And then the one who went before you, because thank God you were second, too.
I know.
Because if you were like I had to go,
oh no,
I think you would have left. I
think they'd be like Lindsay, and there'd be no Lindsay.
I would have taken my water
and like Stacy, do it for me.
No. Oh, yeah, I don't think so. But the first woman who went was
Cindy. She
really
was so good.
And I was like,
nervous for me.
I was like, this is going to be
You didn't
hard.
have faith in me.
I had faith, but I didn't like even the way that you did it on the stage, as good as I thought it was.
Yeah.
It was better. You know what I mean? And having the crowd.
I think the ambiance of, makes it a lot.
It's just something about it. So then you came out and you killed. So I wasn't worried anymore. Then I was like, okay, she did awesome. And everybody, I said I was so impressed with literally everybody's talk.
Yeah.
So you did good.
That's why I felt imposter syndrome, because I walked in and I'm like the youngest and they're like, what do you do? Like, just, you feel...
No, I get
imposter.
that. Yeah, but you did it.
And usually I'm used to doing stuff with Stacy. Like, this I think is the first thing I've done, like, in person
do stuff.
by
you
myself.
do stuff without me. It's me doing stuff without you that will be a problem.
No,
which might never happen. I'm not sure.
No, you will. I know. You're like my security blanket where I'm like, you're there in case I need.
100%. Like, when we've spoken before, the only thing that makes it okay
is that we have each other.
Yeah, that I know. I'm like, okay, if I stop talking, I know she will talk.
It's like you just have that person with you, so that's where
it
is
is like
I've got no one.
A little safety behavior. But no, you did really well.
Thank you.
And you used some of the things that we had talked about.
Yes, and I'm excited for everyone to see it.
I know. So we'll have to put it up, but it's not out yet?
Not out yet.
Okay.
And I think, like, I don't want to keep going on because I feel like we've been talking about this a long time, but the other thing that I think was helpful but not helpful was, remember, I was like, oh, my cousin's husband teaches AP Psych, and I was like, I'm going to practice my talk in front of his class.
Tell us how that went.
Worse than the TED Talk.
Not good.
Because you know what? I'm used to just talking about stuff we know so well. And I think I had all these teenagers staring at me. And the first joke did not hit. And I think that's why I was so surprised when it did hit at the TED Talk.
It totally did.
Yeah, it did not hit. And I did the worst thing you can ever do with a joke, and you explain your joke. And I was like, you see? Like, and they were just staring at me.
That gets you off kilter.
Yeah, and then they're also noticing. Like, you're trying so hard. So then I was literally just like panic. I literally was talking to myself.
Yeah, you came back. You were like, that
attack.
was worse than I could have expected.
Worse than I ever.
But I think it was like,
I think the worst speaking I've ever done.
Really? But I think, don't you think that the audience matters too? Because we've spoken for people that are engaged, and then spoken to people that look like they would love to check out.
And I just forgot how, like, I talk about my own mental health so much in it. It's like really vulnerable. So then I'm like, oh my God, I'm sharing this with a bunch of teenagers who are just staring at me.
Well, you know what, though? That's a rough crowd.
Yeah.
So you
did it there. You could do it
and
anywhere.
you got the not great feedback. So you exposed yourself to the worst case scenario.
I did.
And then it went okay.
And then I thought that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Talk,
no, I feel like people like laughed a few times. Like, you got really.
So I'm hoping that I hope it brings on the good emotions and the like empowering emotions. But
yeah, the message of it, to pay attention to your mental health. Take 2, and it's important.
But I think to the point of, you don't really grow unless you go outside of your comfort zone. And this was like not a baby step out of my comfort zone. This is like a jump 2 feet in.
That was a big one. I know. So it's almost like, what are you going to do? Are you going to chill for a minute?
Well, I think I'm going to get you to do a TED Talk.
All right. Well, let's calm down.
I just told you how much I panicked.
Yeah, let's just settle down. No.
Don't you want this experience of pure panic?
I don't know that I do. I like walking into that. I'm like, I think there's a lot of things I would do before would do
this.
That.
I know.
But this does kind of dovetail into anxiety, which is our topic today.
Yes. So let's get into that.
You were anxious, but you didn't let it stop you, and that is the key with anxiety.
Yes.
You can't let it, make you avoid. You can't avoid things, and you can't really let it stop you because that's when it grows.
And it impacts your functioning.
Yes.
That's always my big thing, is it impacting your functioning. And I think there's ways that anxiety can be really helpful.
So why don't we talk about the difference between
helpful
anxiety that can maybe motivate you a little and anxiety that's debilitating, because it's a big spectrum.
Yeah. Well, when we think about what is anxiety, right, at its core, and it's really to keep us safe and to protect us. And so I think about things like, our brain is wired to protect us. It tells us not to touch the stove when it's hot and things like that. What anxiety does is it's a reminder for us of I think about it in a healthy way of reminding us that something matters to us. So it's the sense of, if you have a test coming up, it's good to feel a little anxious because that helps motivate us to study.
Yes.
I'm nervous for this test, so I'm going to study so I'm best prepared.
Yes.
Where if you don't have that anxiety, then you're just like, I have a test, I might not study.
And that's a good example, because talking about the spectrum, that's appropriate, right?
Very
there's an obvious stressor.
Yes.
We're worried about it.
Yes.
That makes us study.
Yeah.
Which is different than if you might have an anxiety disorder or really struggle where I can't sleep, I can't function. I'm starting to
You don't study because your anxiety
is so big. I'm so
big.
stressed. I'm procrastinating. Whatever it is that happens to you, your stress response.
It becomes unhelpful.
It gets in the way. So then it's, the unhelpful anxiety, and that's the alarm in your brain, which you talked about, is going off and there's not a danger.
And it's not matching the situation. That's what I like to say.
Yes. You're at a 10 and the test is like a 4.
Right. Like me with my TED Talk. I was at a 12. And
yeah, that was a big one.
I should have had the truth of what I talk to my clients a lot about anxiety is it's when it goes to the point past helpful, a lot of times it's what we're really looking at is our confidence. I didn't have confidence in myself enough to say I can do this. And even if worst case scenario happens that I do forget, I can handle that. My anxiety was you're going to mess up, you're going to forget, and you're not going to be able to recover, and it's going to be awful, and everyone's going to be look at this dumbass up there trying to give a TED Talk,
Yeah.
So it's
no, and as you're saying that, I think a good definition of anxiety is the overestimation of a threat and the underestimation of your ability to cope. And sometimes I think we don't pay enough attention to that second part.
It's confidence piece.
Yes, because if you know you can cope, even if something bad happens or,
worst case scenario, your anxiety, the inappropriate anxiety actually becomes true.
Yes, that you know that you have a toolbox
set.
And that you can cope with it. And I think that can make such a difference. And we don't always hit on that piece as much. We look at is this a real threat? Or are you giving, are you making your
label your anxiety, take deep breaths, use these coping skills. But with the core, what's underneath, a lot of times it's we don't trust ourselves enough. And we create these patterns of thinking in that space. And I think about that a lot in social settings. Anxiety is healthy and good in social settings because it helps me not say something offensive or if I hurt someone's feelings or I'm being thoughtful, let me think about how my words impact others.
Yeah.
But an unhelpful way is when I
go home,
and I'm ruminating all night about what I said, and was that a look of did they think that was rude, or did I offend someone, or are they all talking about me now? And we just get
and I think
stuck.
that's when the word ruminating, like you say, that's when you're in that anxiety space because you're in the what ifs. Or you're in either the future, the what ifs, or the past.
Yeah.
And it keeps playing.
Yes.
And that's when it's not helpful. So that's when it's you have to break that cycle.
Yes.
Or it can really, run away. It goes crazy. And then anxiety spreads, as we know. So if you're anxious and you don't deal with it, it becomes easier to become anxious about other things.
Yeah. It generalizes into other areas of our life. And so when thinking about anxiety, I think there's a lot of ways that it shows up diagnosis-wise, and we only think of it. I think people don't even really truly understand what generalized anxiety
Okay, yeah.
disorder
Do you want to go
is.
through the different?
Yeah, I think we should say like, so when your anxiety is impacting your functioning, right, there's a couple different ways that it can show up. And the one that a lot of people talk about is generalized anxiety disorder. And that we see pop up for kids around like 10 years old, usually 10 to like 15, but it can come at any time.
Yeah.
Some people, they have their anxiety and it's like at bay or like not impacting their functioning. And then they have kids or like something in their life
sometimes a stressor
happens.
will bring it up. I think it's like, this could be wrong, but I think it's like 50% of anxiety disorders are diagnosed by the age 14. Or if not diagnosed, they appeared. Because you don't always get help.
The symptoms are there. Yes.
But yeah, so sometimes it can just be a stressor, like parenting will kick it off, or something that happens
like high school, like just certain milestones, different things can impact it.
You start to worry and then you lose control.
Yes, but with generalized anxiety disorder, what we're really looking at is what we've been talking about, like your reactions not matching situation. And a lot of my clients with generalized anxiety disorder are worried about irrational things. So it's like the big things don't make them as worried as like littler things. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
Do you have examples of like
a generalized?
Yeah.
I mean, I think with generalized anxiety, it's you just worry a lot and it's really uncomfortable and it interferes. I mean, it's a level. It's a level thing because we all worry. I think it's like for 6 months you have to have these worries more often
days
than
not.
Yeah, it's more days that we're going to do the DSM. But just that it's not the normal worry to an obvious stressor. It's you're going further. You're in that cyclical space of anxiety and you can't break out and you don't
and it gets out of your control.
Yes, you don't realize really that it's anxiety.
It starts to impact your day.
What you do, what you don't do.
Like we were talking about with the studying, like someone who has generalized anxiety disorder, I'm worried I'm going to fail this test, and if I fail this test, I'm going to fail this class, and I fail this class, and I'm going to fail high school, and fail high school, and I'm never going to get into college, and I'm going to go nowhere in life.
Exactly.
And then it's just like that cycle. So we think about they're worried about the day-to-day things of life.
Yeah.
But symptoms of it can be like irritability. It can be impacting your sleep, impacting your, like some people
stomach.
eat too much, some people eat less. You can get, with kids, we see a lot of stomach aches. So that's like generalized anxiety.
Yeah, a lot of physical symptoms too.
Yes.
Like a lot of times.
Muscle tension. Like I know when I'm really anxious, like right here.
100%.
In my shoulder, for those listening, I like not
you feel
and
it.
I just can't.
It's almost like an incentive now to not get stressed.
I know.
I would love not to have sciatica pain all day.
Yeah, get your anxiety in line.
Get it in check, or you're going to be sore.
Yes. So that I think about. Another one, if we're like going, when we see it a lot with younger kids, is separation anxiety.
Which again, like developmentally, sometimes anxiety is appropriate, but it's when you get out of that window.
Right. So it's okay and normal for kids to be like scared or sad to leave their parents or whoever, caregiver, whoever it is that they're having trouble separating from. But when it begins to impact their functioning, when the parent has to take an hour to drop their kid off, or they're avoiding going out because they don't want to leave their kid. Like when it starts to impact the functioning, that's when we start to think about, is there separation
and when,
anxiety diagnosis here?
Yes, and when it lasts longer than like the appropriate age. Do you know what I mean? Because certainly there's ages where it's appropriate to be screaming when your parent leaves. But
so it's looking at like intensity, frequency, length,
duration.
Of time.
Yeah, a lot of things that go into it. But generalized anxiety, I think, is the most common just because it's a catch-all.
Yes.
But then I think once you like kind of fork off, a lot of people start with the generalized and then it turns into like a social anxiety disorder or like a phobia.
Yeah. Anything else on separation anxiety? Before we move on.
No, I mean, I wanted to talk about the parent treatment, but we could do that later just to loop back to like a treatment. We'll talk about like different ways to treat.
Yeah. So separation anxiety usually we see with younger kids. I don't really see it as much in older kids.
No, not usually. But there are things I think that people would be surprised. You know, like people that are like, oh, I still let them sleep in my bed or I sleep in their bed every night at a pretty older age. And it can become
little traits of it.
It can become a little bit disruptive, you know, so.
That's a good one. Social anxiety.
That's a big one. I think that's the most common.
That's the one of fear of rejection, judgment. Or embarrassment. So a lot of times people with social anxiety will avoid social situations or like they feel very uncomfortable in social situations.
Avoid or escape because sometimes people will go but then leave. Or go and then
ruminate.
Yes, and then ruminate. Or go and use substances to cope because there's a strong link between social anxiety and alcohol use or substance use because that's the safety behavior that makes people feel okay, but that's not what we want.
No. And a lot of times it causes more anxiety.
It does. Well, it does because we talked about that.
That's the cycle. Yeah.
Yes, because then you're like, oh God, my defenses
what did
were
I
down.
do? Yes.
I was drinking, and what did I say? So then you can get into that rumination too.
Yes, but so social anxiety, it's really looking at anxiety specifically in the situation of socializing with groups or individuals. And again, it's to the point, not just, I get a little anxious when I socialize.
Right, because that's appropriate.
Yes,
like
that's appropriate. It's very appropriate.
That keeps us...
It has to be impacting your functioning.
Yeah,
so
that keeps us
again,
safe.
yes, it's like when it's to the point of I'm avoiding, I'm not going, or while I'm there, I'm so uncomfortable.
That I'm miserable.
I'm miserable, and I have to, and sometimes it results in using substances to cope.
Yes, there's a big correlation. And I think too, it's probably easier for kids these days to have social anxiety disorder because think about it. You do not have to interact with people. You can order food without picking up the phone. Like we would have to, pick up the phone and be like, hey, this is my order. Yeah. Now it's like
Uber Eats, drop it at the door. Don't even have to talk to the delivery guy.
Don't talk to one person. No. You can order a car without talking to anybody. I mean, I think if you wanted to,
you could live your whole life without talking to a single soul.
You literally could. Yeah. And I mean, again, it's okay. Like we always say, you don't have to be super
the most outgoing social person.
And social anxiety is different from shyness, which I know we've talked about before, but that's an important point. It's okay to be more reserved.
Prefer not to be around
or quiet.
people.
Like it's okay to be quiet.
Yeah.
But social anxiety is when you're really getting that distress and you really do fear that judgment. So it's a fear, and it affects people.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we need connection.
Yes.
If you listen to our loneliness, it's important.
Exactly. And that's one that drives away connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's social anxiety. Phobia, specific phobia. So that's when we're looking at people who have anxiety around something specific. So it could be someone like with elevators, right? Like they avoid or won't get into elevators. Yeah. We see this a lot. Like people can have a phobia. My mom had a phobia of like driving over bridges. She would avoid driving over bridges.
Yeah.
And now even to this day, she'll do it, but white knuckling it. Like she is like white knuckling her car. I'm like, the car's going nowhere.
Right.
But again, it's not matching. It's not appropriate to the situation. So I'm trying to think of other common phobias. Dogs. Yeah.
Throwing up.
Throwing up.
Enematophobia? I don't even know how to say it. I can read it, but I can't say it. But yeah, a lot of people.
You know I'm not going to be able to pronounce it.
That's the thing too.
Yeah. So that's where it's like something
Needles.
specific. Oh, yes. Needles. Something very specific that causes a lot of anxiety. And we've been seeing a lot more of like medical anxiety. I don't know if you've been seeing that, like
health anxiety.
Yes, ever since the pandemic.
Yeah,
there's been a huge.
I think that gave credence to it because when you're always like, oh, look at the worst case scenario. It's like, well, we had
a pandemic.
Yeah,
so
the worst case scenario. So I could see that.
Yes. So again, it's just like the thought of if you have to go to the doctor, like the idea of, oh my gosh, I had a tickle in my throat, and then our brain goes, oh my gosh, I have strep throat. Oh my gosh, no, I have throat cancer. Oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And it's just
you're spending time on WebMD, and then you're like going through the scenarios. So I mean, it can really go, it can travel quick and far.
Yes. So again, we're feeling overwhelmed. We can't control our thoughts about it. And it's causing a lot of times physical distress.
And avoidance or interference in your life.
Okay, so that's specific phobia and some like health anxiety.
Yeah.
Panic disorder is a little bit different, I would say, than
I think
anxiety.
a lot of times phobia goes into panic disorder. I mean, a lot of these will result in panic disorder.
Yeah, sometimes panic comes as secondary a lot of times. And what panic disorder is like having a panic attack. And then the fear of having more. So just because you have one panic attack doesn't mean you have panic disorder. Panic disorder is when you have a panic attack and then the fear of having another one, you start to avoid.
You don't do things because like if you had a panic attack, maybe like in a meeting, I'm never going to talk in a meeting again.
I'm virtual in meetings.
And
I
then
won't
you're
go
in your
person.
head and you're worried that that's going to happen again.
Yes. So I think, panic disorder and panic attacks is a big thing I've been seeing a lot of lately too.
A lot of panic attacks. And I think not positive, but I think people are more out there and open about panic attacks because so many people really do go to the hospital thinking they're having a heart attack. I mean, that's how powerful a panic attack can be. So I think education is important to know this is my body and
not
like
fearing it.
Yes, and like I can get through it. Again, with like that coping piece. I can get through this. This is only going to last, what is it, like 5 to 20 minutes?
It peaks at 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
So after 10 minutes, your body usually starts to regulate
to
itself.
know that it's like a wave.
It might take a long time, but I think things that are helpful and unhelpful, like the more we're like, I'm dying, the more we fear it. Again, it's always the more we fear it, the more power it has.
How we respond to it.
The harder it is to calm.
Yes.
Like the more intense the panic attack gets and the harder it is
I
to
think
calm
those
down.
are a couple just like basic ones that are good. And then I think like OCD and PTSD, I would maybe
I know OCD is like its own.
A little different.
Yeah. But maybe we could do a whole episode on those ones.
I think let's just talk about these.
Yeah.
And let's talk about, okay, let's say that you are struggling with this and you see that it's impacting your life. What do you do? Like, what are some tools?
And definitely, because we are not, this is not like, don't diagnose yourself. This is just us trying to educate the public just on breaking down what some of these common things that you're seeing on social media are talked about, or if you're experiencing some, definitely go to a professional and get a full assessment.
Because just because you have anxiety doesn't mean you have an anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. But, these are just some clues as to when is it becoming problematic and when you should go see somebody to see what they think. And I think even if you don't have an anxiety disorder, getting tools to cope with anxiety.
Well, it's smaller instead of waiting till you're suffering more.
Intervention, I think early intervention with anxiety is so crucial because it's just, you lose control. And I think it empowers you to get those tools. And
the longer you're stuck in these thinking patterns, the harder it's to break them.
And you know what you said in your TED Talk, and then I have since seen it twice. It's so funny.
Once you hear something.
That it takes 11 years.
Oh, you have seen it?
I saw it twice.
Yeah. No way. I swear. Because I've never seen that.
I don't think I'd ever heard that stat before. That from the time of symptom onset, it takes 10 to 11 years to seek treatment.
To get the appropriate treatment.
Which is think of how much anxiety could grow and how debilitating. Yeah, how much suffering, you could have
experienced.
Yeah, so just even to get some tools.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Our favorite tools.
Yes.
What do you want to go first?
I mean, I think we always say this, again, with the take two, but stopping and labeling it for what it is, getting to know your own anxiety profile, and that starts with your body. We always do with kids. I think the best way to break it down is how we do with kids. What are your body clues?
Yes.
How do you know that you're getting a little
moments?
Yes. How do you know? I start to feel tight. My stomach feels weird. My throat closes up.
Yes.
Whatever it is, you stop at the beginning when you feel that and use one of these tools.
So understanding your anxiety cycle and where can you break it?
Yes. And knowing this, I think you can just get you can run away with, I feel bad. This is so bad. Something bad is happening. No, this is anxiety. I'm starting to feel anxious and that's okay. Yes. But what am I going to do? Turn the volume down a little.
Yes.
We don't need it.
I like that.
We don't need it at a 10. Well, you just said it, didn't you? We just, we don't need it at a 10. So what are the things that we can do once we realize this is anxiety? How can we bring it down?
Yes. And I love coping plans. With my clients, I'll write out our warning signs. And in the moment, it's a lot harder to be what can I do? So having specific plans in place, practicing those when you're less anxious. So then when you are really anxious, you've already practiced.
That's important too, with the breath, which I think is one of the most, the easiest, most accessible tool is to stop and take a deep breath.
Yes.
It has to be the right kind of breath, which I discuss all the time in my office.
Because you can actually cause yourself to feel more anxious if you're breathing incorrectly.
You can hyperventilate. Yeah. And then, because people will say, I used, breathing and it didn't help. And so I'll say, show me a breath. And it's always engaging your shoulders. And just kind of a fast breath. So you really do have to do it from the belly, make your exhale longer now. We know different ways of calming you down. But to practice that, to your point, when you're not in a crisis or when you're not elevated, because it's not going to be an automatic thing for your body to do.
And then you turn it into a muscle memory. You turn it into a new habit that you do when you start to feel anxious. So I was doing a lot of deep breathing before my TED Talk.
And that is the best way. And they say now, have you heard of the physiological sigh? I heard it on the Huberman podcast, but it's 2 sharp breaths and then you sigh out. And they're saying physically that is the quickest way to get you into there you go. Yeah. If you're watching, to get you into a relaxed state. Okay. But even to stop and use a tool, you need to know what's happening. You need to identify.
The awareness piece is often missing.
Right.
Well, and I think when I ask people, this is another thing with anxiety, I ask people, when is the best time to use a coping skill? And we map it out like a bell curve, map out the anxiety gets to a 10. And they're like, oh, probably a 10. I'm like, no, we're already there.
Yeah.
It's when you feel a three coming on, that's when you practice those deep breaths because it's a lot easier to calm yourself down from a 3.
Yes.
Than it is from a 10. And so I say I would rather see the waves where it's we keep having to calm ourselves down from a 3 than this huge 10 wave of anxiety.
Because I think once you get to a 10,
it's riding it out.
You can't control it. And I think this is an important thing to say too, because we talk a lot about reframing your thoughts, or if it's a thought that's making you anxious, trying to make it a neutral thought or a less scary thought. But if your body's escalated in a stress response, the front of your brain is turned off. Yeah. So you really do. The first step is feel these feelings and calm your body, and then do whatever kind of reframe
tool,
or, using any type of cognitive tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think then that, is just be sure you're in your body. And I think like a grounding is good for that.
Yeah.
If you're really stressed, I like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yes.
Do you want to say what that is?
The senses?
Yeah.
So you go through the senses, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I always
I think it could be anything.
order.
I don't think it matters. Like look for 5 things.
Yes.
Touch 4, listen for 3, smell 2, and taste 1. And if you can't taste, we say say a self-positive.
Or pretend what would that taste like?
Yeah. Think about a food, whatever it is. But that's just really getting you out of your head, which is where the scary anxiety is, and into your body so that you're in the present. You're no longer thinking, what did I say last night? And going on that loop, or what if this? You're here in this moment, and then it's just kind of like a reset.
I like to tell my clients with the grounding, this is what I say. I think we have this fear of no, but I need to think this through right now, right? Okay. And so I say, give your brain a break. You can worry about it after, but let's just give your brain a break. So when they're feeling really overwhelmed and they're worried about what they said or feeling panicky, give your brain a break, do the senses game, or I like to do I Spy, name all the green things in the room. So but again, all we're doing is telling your brain to focus on something else. That's really what we're doing.
Something in the present, actually here.
Yes. And so then you do those things and it allows, like you said, your brain to calm down and that frontal lobe can turn back on. Yes. So then that thinking and your ability to regulate
is much
easier.
Better. Yeah. And then to your point, you can come back to it.
Right. Because I think when you tell yourself such a harsh no, it's
I know,
then
that's
you want
the
to
thing.
think about it more.
You don't want to be make this go away. It's more just okay, I'm feeling this anxiety. I'm going to just tap into my body. I'm going to take a minute and then I'm going to sit here with it and then decide what to do. But then, like we always say, it's a decision and not an autopilot reaction, which is where I think we can get into trouble.
And my favorite tool.
What is it?
You know what it is. Do you have a guess or no?
Your favorite tool?
My favorite type of therapy to do.
Oh my gosh.
Come on.
I feel like I'm losing. Your favorite type of
once I say
exposure therapy.
Yes, I was going to say, once I say, you're going to be like, duh.
Yeah.
I love exposure therapy. And I think a lot of times I love parents, I'm not this, but a lot of times I think parents attempt to do this on their own, but that it actually backfires a lot.
Yeah.
So I see this with social anxiety a lot where it's I just forced my kid into a social situation. I'm exposing them to socializing. They'll eventually get comfortable with it. And maybe that works very rarely, but not really. What I see happens is then this kid is sitting there just trying to survive the moment.
Having a terrible experience.
Yeah. And then it just reinforces, I'm not good at socializing. I don't like social situations.
Yeah.
So what exposure therapy does is we break it down. We make a ladder of steps and we make it into really, really obtainable moments where you get yourself to that 3 or 5 on the anxiety level, and we plan it out. So it's you have your coping skills you're doing beforehand. You have how you're going to talk to yourself. You have your coping skills during. You map it all out, and you get to see the wave of anxiety. So for a socially anxious kid, I might say at a restaurant, you're going to order your own food. And we come up with the plan, and they write out how they feel before, during, out of a 10, after, and they watch, and then an hour after, and they watch their anxiety subside. And what it does is it allows them to gain confidence over their skills.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're observing it too, that, okay, I got through this. It was, and people usually have a pattern. I'm really anxious before, then I'm anxious, and then it subsides. Yes. So I think that's really smart. And exposures is the way to do it. And if you can do it slow, it's manageable, and it builds people's confidence.
Yes.
And then, you can get to the big thing.
Yeah, so that's my favorite.
And then teaching coping skills along the way, or social skills.
Yes, and then they look back and they're I'm do you remember when this made you feel an 8 out of 10? And they're oh my gosh, I do that no problem now. So it's fun for them to see too,
I know.
all the progress.
I love that because that's empowering. It's no, I think with anxiety, sometimes you feel it's being done to you. But it's no, with anxiety, it is really very treatable. And you have a lot of control. And as you're talking about parents, I just want to say I've started working a lot with parents through this SPACE program, which is supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions. I did a training, and this is a little bit of a different framework because—
It sounds so cool.
Yeah, I really like it. You work with the parents and not the anxious child. So all you're doing is working with the parents. The child's behavior is not a metric. It's the parent's behavior, which I think for parents is nice because you can't change your kid, and it's frustrating, and it's okay, why aren't we seeing results? And with this, it's you can have success even if it's still hard for the kids. So the whole, just in general, the premise is that parents a lot of times reinforce anxiety and they try to help. So
right, because it's what we know.
Exactly.
Let me solve this problem for you.
Well, and you don't want to see your kid in distress.
No, never.
So like, oh my gosh, no, don't go there. Or
and
like,
your own anxiety. Well, if you don't go to this party, you're gonna have no friends, and then you're never going to be invited to a party again. Like we have our own worries.
100%. So this teaches you how to react in a different way and not accommodate the anxiety, and how to meet it with, like, there's a two-pronged, validating their emotion, but showing confidence that they can do it. Because it's like, really, without the validation piece, it's kind of like what you're talking about, like throwing them into a scenario and just being like, grin and bear it.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful.
No.
But then I think, the other side is like over-validating and not accommodating, not having them go. Like, oh, it's okay.
If you go, I'll pick you up right away as soon as you're, and then instead of saying, try first, stay at least for 10 minutes, like there's a lot of tools that we know that I can see could be really helpful for parents.
Yes. So
what's your biggest tool for parents?
The biggest tool for parents?
If they have anxious kids.
I mean, I like this framework. So I like, this is the way that you deal with it is, you can help them identify it. I think like psychoeducation, just like knowing.
Help them label it.
Yeah, like it's okay to be anxious and like letting them know that this is what you're feeling and that's normal. And this is what we can do. Like, oh yeah, that is really uncomfortable, but I also have a lot of confidence. Like, you can get through this. And how do you think, like, what's the best plan for you?
So put it on them to
make a plan together.
I like that. Because I think a lot of times parents are like, here's what we're doing this, or
I
here's
do
your
that
option.
even, and I'm a therapist. Like, I find myself being like, do this and then do this. We've talked about this. And it's like, no.
I told you, remember my first client ever out of my internship. I think I shared this before, but she was talking about how oftentimes she has a lot of anxiety, and then she feels like she tries to talk to her mom about it, and her mom just like wants to solve it for her. And I was like, oh, that's really frustrating, doing the therapy, whatever. And then later in the session, I'm reflecting. I'm like, I became her mom. She was like, I'm anxious because I'm getting a bad grade. I'm like, oh, we could email the teacher. I'll help you email the teacher. We could do this. You could do this. Like, you could just do it. And then I'm like, I saw her get like so anxious. Her body language changed. I'm like, I am just mimicking what she just told me is unhelpful.
That's really funny.
That her mom does. So I'm like, I had to learn.
It's so like instinctual to be like, oh, you're uncomfortable. Let's figure it out. And you do, but it's like giving them the agency. Yes. What do you think? And certainly, like, as a parent, like, you can help.
And building their skill, like building their problem solving skill. Because that's what I see a lot of kids struggling with lately. It's like they have no problem solving skills. They're like, well, I'm doing bad in school. I'm like, okay, have you looked at your schoolwork? Well, no, that's too overwhelming. Okay, let's pull it up. Let's look at it. Like, what are your options? They just go into like avoidance, or their parents a lot of times over-accommodate, and then it's like, well, my mom will figure it out.
Well, and that's the thing too. If as parents, again, nobody wants to see their kids suffer.
No.
But if you're removing everything uncomfortable out of their way, you're not going to be there someday, and something uncomfortable is going to happen.
They can't handle
They're screwed. Yeah. So it's just kind of like taking the time to build that up. And honestly, some kids I think are just more anxious. Yeah. Some families are more
genetic.
Anxious.
It's environmental. There's so many factors.
So many things. And like I always say, as a parent, it's not your fault, but you're in a unique position to help.
I like that.
Nobody can help. Even like I think therapy for kids is obviously very helpful, like the psychoeducation and, everything we do. But I think parents are with them and interact so much. How can it not be so beneficial?
Well, the studies have shown kids and parents in therapy at the same time together has the best outcomes by far than parents just in therapy or kids just in therapy. And it makes sense, like working together, everyone's together.
Understanding, and you're like a team, and it's like, okay, this is how we're going to deal with this.
Yes.
So I like really that whole paradigm. I like it.
Yeah, and I like saying to kids, like, what are our options here? Let's go through all of them. And even when I do with clients, it's like, worst case scenario, just failed the class. Like, allow that to be an option and be like, okay, turn in all the homework that you're missing tomorrow. Like, what the extremes, and then usually then they can be like, well, no, that wouldn't work, and then they can find some helpful solutions.
Yeah, like it's so true. There's like external action plans that you can do, and then internal, the work of don't let this anxiety
build your confidence.
Yeah, like don't let it run away.
What's your biggest fear? What's going to get in the way of you being able? I don't want to go to this party. Like, what would you maybe say to a kid who's like, I don't want to go to this party? Like, what would be a way to help?
Thanks for just asking me that.
I would
break
normally
it down.
say,
Exposures, right?
Yeah, no, I would normally be like, okay, break it down. What's our fear here? Like, what's making it hard to go to the party? Instead of assuming or telling them why they're scared or why they can do it, it's like, well, what if I have no one to talk to? Or what if like people start being cliquey? Or what if this happens? It's like, okay, let's think about that. What if that happens?
Well, and I think that that's important too, because that's where you can intervene and do like social skills training. Or like I used to do conversation bingo with people that, you know, they think, oh, I'm not going to be able to say anything. Yeah. And I think preparation also helps with anxiety. So it's always like, well, you don't want to ruminate, but you can prepare.
Problem solve.
Yeah, problem solve. But I think as you're saying that, I would probably try to, find out what's going on and then break it down and start to do small things that make them feel more confident, like the ordering out or, you know, you have to, what's another one that we do? Like,
well, I make them go, and I apologize. So I swear I tip the Starbucks workers after this, but I make them go and ask for a Starbucks drink and then be like, oh, I actually wanted a venti, or oh, I actually wanted, can you actually take off the whipped cream? And like, it's so annoying, I know, for the workers, and I do tip them after, but it's like, how uncomfortable is it to ask someone?
Yeah, sitting in that discomfort and starting small, but it's still really uncomfortable. I was going to say, like, I've had people like ask at Target. Yeah. And some people would say, actually a few high schoolers, it's easier to ask an older person. So they would start out with an older person, but then we work up to someone their age.
I like that.
So you work up and then you go to the party. You know what I mean?
We do a lot of like asking questions in class or giving answers in class. Those ones tend to be hard too. I've had kids like have to work on like sharing their opinion, like in their friend group or at home.
Yeah,
like
that's hard. That's hard as an adult, you know. But just sitting with that discomfort and seeing that you can. Yes. And then I think you're not as scared of it.
And parents sitting in the discomfort with them.
That it's hard too. To see that can be hard. That's why we jump in and try to solve it.
So that's why I always like to say, get more curious. So when your kid comes, I'm worried about this, instead of being like, why? You got this. It's like, oh, okay, tell me what's making you feel worried. Make them dig, because anxiety likes to be really big and ambiguous. Something bad's going to happen. You can't handle this. But when we break it down, like, I'm worried that this person's going to be mean to me at the party. That is something then you can help your kid problem solve for, make a plan for.
Right. And see, like, is there a missing skill, like social skills or confidence, whatever it is. And then
get to the root of the
work on that. But I love the exposures too.
I know, it's my favorite.
You can even do it. I mean, I think, well, even as an adult, you know what I mean?
I did an exposure as a dog. That one, see, I didn't do the ladder. I went to a 10.
I think you did though. I think you did.
You think it was fine?
I think you've done a lot of little things, and then you did do a jump. You jumped from an 8.
Jump.
You jumped from a 7.
I know. I jumped from a 7 to like a million. No, but I think yeah. But I mean, the world is becoming so much more anxious, rightfully so, because our world is very.
There's a lot to be anxious about. That's another thing too. Yeah. Managing your input, I think. I keep going back to parenting, but I saw a TikTok about fentanyl last weekend, and my son was like, "Please stop telling me this." Like
your son who like doesn't do anything.
Well, he's 14, but I was like, "Don't take an Advil from somebody," because this was a kid who
tried to take an Adderall.
Who tried to take one Adderall and died. So I think I told my kids like 3 times, and it's like, okay, I'm glad I know that. I don't need to go do a deep dive on that. That is going to make me more anxious. I need to realize I do what I can.
I'm aware. Then I gotta table I've informed my children.
Yes. And you can't go down. Like, it's like a tumbleweed. It gets real.
Then your anxiety gets spiked of things you can't control.
100%. So focus on what you can control. And what I can control there is have a talk.
Yes.
Try to like keep it.
Educate.
Yes.
Educate.
Keep talking. But I think we could do a lot on anxiety. I think like taking 2 maybe to know what your anxiety triggers are. And once you ID those, you can kind of work with how you're going to cope with them. Yeah. I think that could be a good thing to do.
Yes. I love it. Okay. As always, you can find out more information about our wonderful podcast on TikTok at Take2Pod.
And Instagram, take2.pod. And if you guys have suggestions or if there's anything, we would love to hear.
You want us to deep dive on something we talked about today or
I know we've had like our friends or people text us, but I would love to hear from anybody listening. What would you want to hear?
What do you want to hear more of?
Yeah, because we have a lot of ideas, but
we're here for you. So you tell us would be the most helpful.
If not, we're just going to
be parents problem solving for you guys, telling you what you want to hear.
I'll write your kids' emails.
Exactly.
So don't worry about it.
All right. Have a good week, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Double wave.
Bye.
Double wave it.
Double wave.
Thank you for listening to the Take Two podcast. Lindsay and Stacy are licensed therapists, but they aren't your therapists, and this podcast is not therapy. Production assistance is provided by Bird Blue Creative at bird.blue.